Well, for more on China's economy, let's bring in Yan Liang, Professor of Economics at Willamette University. Always good to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me, Rachelle. Always good to talk to you.
So first, I want to get your takeaways from the latest inflation data, both producer and consumer data.
Right. So we have seen both data have gone down. The CPI has risen only by 1.5% year on year in December, down from 2.3 back in November. And the PPI, the factory gate price ratio index, has risen by 10.3% in December year on year. And again, that is down from the 12.9% back in November. And for the year as a whole, the CPI grew by 0.9% year on year, which is much lower than the government's target of 3%. So what that means is that China is doing very well when it comes to price stability.
So what do you attribute that to?
Right. So there are several factors. One is that the vegetable prices and the food price has gone down significantly in December, and also there are some relax in, for example, in energy crunch in the energy prices, and also in some of the primary commodity prices. Now, the PPI still remain relatively high, as we just mentioned. It's still about an increase by 10.3%, but that has not gone down to the consumer price just yet. The other factor, I think, is, again, we're still in the pandemic year. The demand, especially consumer demand, is still not to the level that we would like. And so that puts dampening effect on inflation. And last, I think China is also doing relatively successfully when it comes to supply side sort of capacities. China was able to continue to provide industrial production. And so all of these, I think, help to stabilize the price.
So then, as you mentioned, with COVID obviously still ongoing and China with its own strategies to try and combat it, how has all this impacted China's economic recovery?
Right. So as we know that China has adopted the so-called zero COVID policy, now there are definitely pros and cons of that strategy. It does in some ways help the economy because, with draconian lockdowns and restrictions, it helped to maintain the general health of the public and also allow for production to relatively run smoothly, right, after, short restrictions and close downs. That said, it does in some ways drag on, for example, consumers' consumption, especially consumption of services. There's restrictions on traveling, and there are also, negative effects on people dying out and things like that. On the other hand, I think it also in some ways drag on supply side. For example, we know when COVID hits, there are lockdowns, there are close out of factories. There are also, for example, closed down on ports. Right now, one of the concern is that Ningbo, ports, which is close to Tianjin, could face some sort of short-term closure or restrictions, and that could definitely affect the supply chain. So COVID still, affected the economy in many negative ways. But I think, again, it's up to China's decision, right, weighing on its medical resources and the COVID tolerance and also economic impact and so on and so forth to decide what is the right policy for China.
And then, of course, amid all this, we're also coming up on the second anniversary of the U.S.-China Phase 1 trade deal. How successful was this plan, and how has it progressed under President Biden now?
Yeah, so I think, it's still an ongoing process. The Phase 1 is still it's expiring, but China is making its own commitment and trying to increase that purchases. But there are many factors, as we know, because of COVID. There's the demand side shock, but also the supply side, because the U.S. production definitely gets interrupted. So they're not able to even supply some of the products to China. So there's no way if China wants to purchase and not have that availability. Also, with the high-tech restrictions, high-tech product restrictions, and airplane incidents and so on and so forth, it's difficult, for China to be able to single-handedly make that commitment. But China has also made other progresses in terms of, trade practices, like banning, forced technology transfer in its new, Foreign Investment Act, and so on and so forth. So I think, it's still ongoing, and as the trade representative Catherine Tai has talked about, there should be some sort of recoupling, and there should be some, extension of the exemption of the tariffs. So I think, it remains to be seen how the patchwork would work in terms of normalized trade relationships.
Well, thank you for getting us up to speed. Yan Liang, they're Professor of Economics at Willamette University.